Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. As you might know, or may not know, depending on what you've been doing and where you've been hiding for the last sort of month or so, we launched a new podcast called Recruitment Leaders Unlocked, and our webinar topics link back to those podcast topics that the recruitment leaders have been talking and discussing about on that podcast series. So if you haven't gone to the podcast, have a look at the podcast. It's a really nice podcast. This series, though, the topic is on leadership, and this week we're going to discuss, as recruitment leaders, if things are failing, where do you turn? And so we've got Dave and Heather today. Paul is
Hi.
heading towards Southampton to get on a boat to go cruising. The whole cruise have said, will he stop talking before he gets to France? And I'll probably say he won't, but we'll never know. But there you go. So we're going to kick off today because I think what I've done today is I've tried to shape the questions to be a little bit more personal and about some of our failings as leaders and how we've changed those around and see what we've done. So I'm going to jump in with the first question. How much of business problems are actually a leadership problem?
About 95%.
Oh,
I think
Heather's put a figure on it.
well, I
Quanti-
thought I'd shock you from HR to go with numbers first of all.
I'd
I
like it.
like to unsettle you early, Howard.
I'd like you to quantify that figure.
I tell you
I'd,
for why, as leaders of organisations and or owners of organisations, the buck stops with us. It's our responsibility. And whatever ultimately the business problem is, it's for us as leaders to find it and to work hard on a solution for it, whether we draw other people in to help us with that. But ultimately, if we're whatever the problems are, if we as leaders aren't finding it, noticing it, addressing it, coming up with solutions for it, then it's down to us. So that's where my 95% of it. The other 5% is there's always stuff that's outside of our control. So that's a token nod to the faint, the fates and the gods. There are some things occasionally that are outside our control.
what's that comment about stats and lies?
Yeah, lies, damned lies and statistics.
Statistics.
I think to add to Heather's point, I haven't put a percentage on it, but what I would say is that percentage is increased when leaders don't accept that they're part of the problem. So
Mm.
when you have a business issue that you've got to resolve and you carry on the way you've always carried on, and that isn't working, and then you still carry on, that's when leadership issues become much more significant than whatever the business issues that you face are. Because every day we know this in running a recruitment business, there's a challenge, there's something new, and it is a business where it's difficult to plan for, more so than many other businesses, because we're placing people who have their own lives, their own purposes, their own drivers, and they can do what you want, even if you've done everything absolutely right. They don't turn up on a Monday morning and got to start again. But then that is also down to leadership. So the biggest challenge is, as you say, Heather, whether it's 95% or 90% or whatever the number is, it's a leadership one. I was pausing, Harry, because I was waiting for Paul to answer the first question. I thought he was going to pull over on the way with a number, so we didn't get it.
It's interesting because I think, yeah, I'm going to completely agree with both of you that leadership is, the problem. But I'm also going to sort of caveat that what happens is that leaders display certain types of leadership traits, and therefore everyone follows that trait. And therefore you've got a problem with people following that trait. And I remember when I was sort of a junior team leader, initially I would look for someone to blame or look for something to blame so I could, move away from it. I remember purposely, and I was a sort of junior team leader, it was 1995. I remember the year specifically when this changed. And I'd been a junior team leader and still playing rugby at the time. We'd just been promoted into the Premiership and we'd lost. We got smashed by Harlequins in the first game. We got beaten by Gloucester in the second game. We had a load of injuries. We were playing Northampton at home. And I remember the Wednesday night training session, everyone was bitching about each other. Coaches were bitching about this, etc., etc. Anyway, so there's the squad was announced. We walked into the team changing room. The squad was announced, and the coaches and Fran Cotton was stood in the middle of the room. And Fran at that stage was, still it was before the '97 Lions, so they were building up towards that Lions. And so he talked individually about everyone doing their individual job and concentrating on the job. And he made a big point about the coaches and the leaders about they've got to lead from the front and can't start blaming everybody. And he just sort of very 2-minute conversation, and that was it. And he said, but as you walk out the door, I want you to read one thing. I've posted things on the changing room mirrors. I want you to read these things. He said, I want you to digest it. And every time you look in the mirror on the way home, I want you to think about what that poem said. And that poem was called The Man in the Glass. And it's about stop blaming everybody else. Look at you. You're the person to please. You're the person to get up and work from it. And it was really interesting. We stopped blaming the Thursday night training session. We'd stop blaming each other. We stopped blaming the coaches. We stopped blaming the ref, the weather, etc. And on the Saturday, we put 50 points on Northampton. And it was a really interesting that it was about accountability for everyone to do their jobs. But he made a point of saying the buck stops with the leadership. So if you're a senior player, if you're a senior leader in the team, if you're the senior coaches in the team, you've got to stop blaming everybody else and start to pick them up. So you've got to start to look in the mirror. And it was really interesting. That was still there on the Saturday as we walked out in the change rooms. It was there in the middle of the mirror from there. So I think you're right, Heather, that it is stop blaming that, the leaders will blame everybody else and look at everybody else. But I think that's a culture thing. And I think it's also that then trickles down the line and everyone else starts to look at easy way options out and other things to blame. So the book stops with the leader, and it's down to the leader to change the culture to make it a culture of how you're going to do things rather than sit there doing nothing. So I think it is a leadership problem, but also that problem then becomes everyone else's problems if the leadership doesn't do the right thing. So looking back down your careers, during any sort of downturn, what was the biggest single mistake you made during the downturn, and what did it teach you about leadership?
I think
This is such an interesting question.
isn't it? Just because I don't know that there's an easy answer to it, is there? I mean, I can look back at different times in my recruitment career, and the biggest mistake, and this may sound a strange answer, is not seeing it coming when in the past we've got through it. So, like downturn, if you look at the numbers of jobs, numbers of jobs decreases, activity drops, people's motivation drops, and that happens often when you're about to enter a downturn. Yet, I can say on at least 2 or 3 occasions, I've managed a team where that happened. I haven't woken up to the fact that actually this is happening, and what we did 3 or 4 years ago, if we just did it a bit earlier, we'd navigate our way through it. So I think sometimes it's just being blindsided by your own belief that actually it's okay, we'll get through this, rather than recognizing actually when this happened before, what did we do? And capturing that a little bit earlier saves you a week, 2 or 3 weeks, a month, whatever it is, of heartache, because you look at it and go, what did we do last time? And not doing that is a mistake that I've made in the past.
Interesting. So my example is slightly different, as you'd expect, because I was in HR. Um, and I'm going to just talk briefly about COVID and one of the mistakes I made in COVID. I actually think we did lots of things right during COVID, but specifically, you've asked for a mistake. My mistake was in COVID, everything became, I was in quite a big corporate organization, big group of recruitment businesses around the world, and everything became about the people and it all became about HR, and we were very much in the spotlight. And there was a lot of work to do. And my biggest mistake was not trusting my team to step up and do it. So I protected my team in the way I was protecting everybody else in the organization, and ended up taking everything onto my shoulders rather than seeing that actually my team were part of the solution to this. And so I really struggled with burnout during that period, because I sort of panicked a bit and I was like, oh, only, oh my God, this is so big, only I can do this. I didn't recognize that at the time, but looking back on it, so huge lesson in times of strain. Yes, it is all down to you, but you have to trust your leadership team. right? You have to get support for yourself and you have to spread the load.
I think I remember that 2008 when it sort of really hit home.
Oh, I remember that one.
And I've talked about this before. Yeah, I remember being in Scotland and we'd just bought Spring. Dave, we just bought Spring, and yeah, Scotland were Spring office were quite happily telling me that they've got 435 contractors out on the Monday. By the Friday, they had 35 contractors out because RBS had just closed 400 contractors and stopped everything. And I think what it taught me was that it wasn't about just having a plan B. It was about having a plan C and a plan D, etc. And it was talking about what we found was that we weren't listening to the ground. We weren't listening to what was happening. We weren't listening to what was going on. And we found that the people on the ground floor were a little bit frightened of actually talking to the management about changing strategy, changing tact, etc., etc. And so once we started to understand that we needed to change and change quickly, um, we started to experiment. Let's try that here. Let's try that there. Let's try that there. A bit like you do now with marketing, where everyone's doing A/B testing. We'll send these three emails out to the different people and see which gets the same result. So we started doing A/B testing on various different strategies to help capture sales, deliver more from our existing client base, etc., etc. And that started to work. But that came from the floor. That came from the sales floor. That came from the staff. And I think we've gone a little bit blind about that and what have you. And I think that's the bit you've got to listen to what the floor is saying because, you know, as much as we don't like to believe that we are in the lofty heights of management, you're a long way from the ground floor. And the ground floor is where it's happening and where it's changing. And that's the bit that I sort of learned in my career is that you've got to start to listen to what people are actually saying. And yes, you don't have to accept everything, but if there's merit in changing something, then it should change. And we've talked about that before when we talk about closing the execution gap. You know, is it the strategy that's wrong, or is it the execution of the strategy that's wrong? And at that time, we were driving our team to deliver more, deliver more, deliver more, when actually they couldn't have delivered any more. They couldn't have done any more KPIs in the way they were doing it. And so the strategy had to change. And once we started to grasp that, then we changed the strategy, then things started to change around. So I think it is about that, you know, not having a plan B, plan C, plan D, but not listening to the guys on the ground and the ladies on the ground and hearing what they're actually saying and then saying, right, let's take some action rather than being, it's my plan, we'll deliver this plan and that's how it's going to be. There has to be changes to the plan to help you deliver from there. I think this question is going to be a really interesting question. And I think I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this because I think this is happening now constantly. What lies are leaders telling themselves that are making things worse?
And I'll sum up in one quick sentence. The lies they tell themselves is that all of their people are with them. They're all on the same page. They're all in it together. And as a good leader, I've told them where we are and what we're going to do, and they believe me. And that is so often a lie because each person has their own individual motivations. And what is maybe a challenging business circumstance for you as a leader or for me as a leader isn't the same for every one of our people. And some of them don't feel it at all. Others are even more worried than the leaders are because it absolutely matters that the company survives or that they get paid or whatever it may be. So often as leaders, we tell ourselves, yeah, I've communicated well. Everybody knows where we are. We're all at the same level. And often that just isn't the case. And that comes down to what we'll talk about a bit later on about communication being understood rather than just delivered.
Interesting. I think there's a group of leaders, so not all leaders, that are really depressed right now and feel that a bad year is inevitable, and they're sucked in by the doom and gloom that they read in the mainstream media and on LinkedIn, which is just turned into the most. Maybe I'm following the wrong people, but oh my God, what a depressing place that is for recruitment at the moment. So I think there's some people who believe that, and they've forgotten that there are always, in every downturn, in every difficult trading period, success stories, right? So if there are success stories, and we all know that they happen, there is no reason why you can't be one of them. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of loss of belief, that we tell ourselves that a bad year is inevitable because of the economy, when in fact that isn't the case. There are always people who buck the trend. So find out what they did, do it.
So
Is
completely
that what
agree.
you were expecting, Howard?
No, no, no. I was expecting something like that, but yeah, you stole my answer for the next question. But that, not to worry.
Sorry.
It's all
Well,
right.
you haven't got Paul here, right?
I haven't got Paul here that steals every answer. You've got to then think of something on the spot. I think it's the comment of all my team behind me is one, and I think it will be okay is another one that sort of a lot of managers it'll be okay. The market will
Yeah,
change it. I'll be
yeah,
fine.
yeah,
I'll be
yeah,
fine. I'll
yeah.
be fine. Okay, but I think the one that really sort of grates at me when I hear it constantly is my biggest client will never desert me. And yet I'm seeing so many companies now really struggling because their big clients have stopped using them or their big clients have got problems. And it's that, I suppose it's that reliability on those big clients that puts you in the trouble in the first place. So it gives you, in a good market, it gives you that false sense of security. But in a bad market, it should be absolute panic. And we saw it through COVID, how many big clients stopped recruiting and their recruitment agencies had big problems. And it's the same thing
Mm.
now. And I think we've got to understand that your big client isn't your savior. Your big client is more of a millstone around your neck to some degree. It's great when the market's going because you can carry that millstone, but when it's not, that millstone becomes very, very heavy and will drag you down at some point. And therefore, you've got to start to think that. And I think that's the biggest lie that they're telling themselves, that their big client will never desert them. They will always get work out of them, etc. When we've seen that so more often than not, it doesn't happen. I mean, let's go back to the answer on the first question. The leadership in the spring Scottish office were flying 435 contractors out and thought they were absolutely brilliant. Within 5 days, that was down to 35 contractors. Their biggest client would never, ever desert them, but their biggest client foreclosed on 400 contractors. You know, and that is what's happening to quite a lot of recruitment agencies. And when you hear, the analysts talk about, certain numbers of companies are going under, etc., I would hazard a guess that a large percentage of those are going under primarily because their big client has pulled the plug and stopped recruiting, and they haven't got anything to fall back on. And that goes back to Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. They've never actioned that because they've sort of fallen into that trap of I'll always be all right with my one big client, it'll be fine, when that's not the case. So bearing in mind that that's what the biggest lies that they're telling themselves that no. So what immediate changes did you make to your strategy, to your team, or to your mindset that started the shift in momentum when you were in that situation, when the market was bad and you were in that situation? And I'd be really interested to hear Dave, but I'm more interested to hear from Heather from a HR point of view, because you're looking from the outside in sometimes into that sales team, because obviously that's the engine room providing cash. So I'm interested in what Dave, but I'm really interested in your comments on that one, Heather, just to put you on the spot.
Shall I go?
Dave, you're
Yeah,
first.
okay. Shall I go first? Well, the immediate change that I made, both at a big company, so I'll go back to the days when I was fortunate enough to be leading Spring, and also a company where I only had 14 staff. And both of it was the change I made was I over communicated and communicated to the best of my ability everything that was going on. So in a smaller company, there's always the fear, well, don't tell them everything because that's not good. And the answer was, if you don't communicate as much as you can, as well as you can, everything, in that vacuum, your people may make up what they think is going on. So much, much better to hear from the leader that you value your staff and you're going to tell them what's going on as best you can. Obviously, when I was at a public company, That was very difficult to do. But what I did do was set up an email that went out to all staff. We're talking about 1,100, 1,200 staff. It went out to all staff on a Sunday night. And then Monday morning, whatever we had on a Monday morning changed. And Monday morning was devoted to email exchange for answering as many of the questions as we could answer. And we were going through what was called a spring.com program. It was putting everything online. It was quite a big change program in a market that was also quite tough. But that over communication and what it led to over time, not straight away, but what it led to over time was trust. Actually, this guy and this team, and my team, it wasn't just me, have got our back. They're telling us everything, and we can ask them anything. And when there were market sensitive information, I would just answer and say, well, I can't answer that, it's market sensitive, but this is my opinion on this. So I think communication and over communication in tougher times is always good. And if you can do it, it will serve you well with your people.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because my perspective is, as Howard was expecting, is slightly different. So when you're in a downturn, often the role that HR are asked to play is downsizing, right? So we're asked to, and doing that well, doing that properly takes a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of time and resource. And so your leadership team, your HR team can be sucked away into dealing with the people who are exiting the business. And of course, you've got to do that properly, and you've got to put resource into it because you're protecting your reputation moving forward, and you're thinking about, you know, all kinds of risk mitigation and things like that. But actually, the real value, and so you tend to get in downturns, L&D, so HR are just left to do those sorts of things. You know, deal with the people we're exit for the business, deal with we've got to, you know, right size our back office or whatever it is, when in fact this is the moment at which you've got the most chance to impact other people who are staying. So why use your people resource to be focused on those people who are leaving the business instead of being focused on the people who are still in the business? Because actually all the things that your L&D team and your people team, or the resource you have for that, internal or external, depending on your size, becomes more important. So you need to be spending more time on coaching, more time on management, more time on upskilling. You know, changing markets needs more learning and development. Managers need more support to manage people in difficult situations, and how to lead and to motivate and to think. So actually, for me, the change is you are forced by circumstance to focus on the people you are exiting from the business, when actually what you should be doing is focusing on the people who are staying in your business. And that's really difficult. That's really difficult because you're often losing your resource too.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it? I think when you look at those two conversations about oversharing information or not sharing enough or dealing with the negative side of it, and
Yeah.
I think that's the bit that I sort of picked up on that when I was sort of going through that sort of situation, certainly in 2008, was I found myself, my inner discussion was very negative. And I found myself externally trying to be really positive. And obviously, your body language gives that away that you're not really thinking what you're saying and you're not really believing in what you're saying. And I think your people around that pick that up very, very quickly. So I stopped that negative conversation and started to change that negative conversation and that narrative in my own head. But then I started to realize that what I'm listening to, whether it be the news, whether it be on the radio, etc., was also very negative. So again, stopped listening to that. But what I started to find that you could hear that negative connotation being discussed constantly in the offices. So I started to create a how culture. And when someone said something negative, I would say, okay, that's great. I understand that point. How are you going to change it? And I started to put them on an instant spot on how you're going to change it. And what it stopped after a while is it stopped people talking in that negative connotation because they realized if they were going to say something and I was in the room, I was going to start to ask them how. So I started to work on my
Yeah, and
little,
it's so important, right? You want people to focus on
Yeah.
solutions, not
Yeah.
problems,
yeah.
right? I think it's great, Howard.
And that, you know, really started to people to think about what they're doing. And I suddenly realized it's a lot easier to get 5 people, 10 people, 20 people to carry the burden, as you call it there, Heather, than carry it myself. And it found it that we started to accelerate away because we all became accountable for looking at the positives and looking at the things that we could do, looking at the things that we could drive. And I thought it sort of put the onus on everyone rather than being the onus on the manager. And I think sometimes the manager, the leader, etc., that onus is so powerful that sometimes you do get dragged into the negative side of it and you start to agree with the negative side, and therefore all you're doing is portraying negativity to your staff. And as we've worked out in the past, that that negative culture is 5 times more powerful than a positive one. So you've got to work really hard to drive that positive culture and look for the things. And I said you stole a bit of one of my answers. That was the things that there's always people buying. In a market, there are always
Yeah,
people buying. You're
yeah,
just a recruiter that can't find those people buying. So we've got to work hard at being more positive about what's happening and stop that conversation in our own head that it's hard. Then we start the lies. It'll be okay, etc. And that's where it all sort of manifests from, is that own internal conversation. So I find if you sort of harness that and can drive that properly, then all of a sudden you've got a very different workforce and a very different culture, because you don't let the negative side look into it. You start to celebrate
Do you know,
all the
it's
little
really
things.
interesting. I was coaching a sales director, and one of the things that she was finding, and it's a really obvious, daft little thing, but her drive to work in the morning was depressing her. So she'd get up, she'd be all fired up, ready to go. And by the time she got to the office, she was like doom and gloom. And it was really as simple as what she was listening to
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
journey to work, right? So she's got Radio 4 on, or she's got some news or a podcast, and it was just bringing her down. And just changing that to this kind of put together some playlists or some podcasts that were bit more positive, and so that she could maintain that lift that she had when she got up in the morning after the first cup of coffee all the way till she got in the office. Just that small change in routine changed her motivation for the whole day. And I think right now, listening to the news, we
yeah,
ought to put
yeah.
a ban on it. It's just awful, right? It's
So
the
it's,
worst thing you can do in the morning.
Well, I had exactly similar story with somebody that was just so depressed by what's going on, and it's so easy to
Yeah.
be depressed. He took one of his son's Spotify Ibiza playlists,
Yes.
yeah, and played that on his
Yeah.
headphones on his train into London.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't particularly go for that type of music, but it's upbeat.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
before, he was always listening to the news because he wanted to be informed about what was going on, except what was
Yeah.
going on was always so
Yeah,
awful.
and sometimes we forget those little things that we've always done,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The impact they're
yeah,
going to have on us in the day.
yeah.
That'll be leading into your habits, Howard.
But it's so true, because I do exactly the same. I listen to certain things, but I have a trigger point when I'm driving into work, or when I used to drive into work. I have a
Yeah,
trigger point of, right, when I get to that point, I'm going to turn whatever I'm listening to off and put something more motivational on, or do that, so I get in the
yeah,
right mindset. Because I always think you wake up in the morning and you're 100% full of promise, and then you
yeah,
walk downstairs and the milk's off.
yeah.
So I can't have my cornflakes. The milk's off. For those people who drink tea and coffee, you can't get that. So you're instantly at 98%. You walk outside and you can't. It's frosty and you've got to de-ice your car and all those little things. So by the time you get to work, you've lost 10,
You can just
15%.
have just, yeah, you can
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah, yeah.
destroy your day just by having the
Yeah.
wrong routine in the morning. So,
So I always look, if you found something, it's the same conversation. If you say yes to something, you got to say no to something. I always find if you say something negative, you got to say something positive at the other side of it to try
yeah,
and drive it round. And I stopped listening to the news and stopped listening to the thing on the way to work. And I was even listening to Talk Sport. There's still the news comes on every half an hour, and it's like, oh my God, that's so, and even they were talking about the negative things that happened at the weekend and all that sort of stuff. And I just found it very sort of
Mm,
that's what I'm triggering my mindset, because
mm.
you're a product of your environment, basically. So
Absolutely,
if
yeah.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
so we've got to change that and work that. So let's push that onto the different question then. So how did you motivate your people and engage when the morale revenue was at their lowest? What did you do?
Mm,
I mean, one thing that I did, but not deliberately, but it turned out to be a good thing, was we made sure that whatever our expenditure on our people was in terms of entertainment, we kept that number. So for spring, that was a big number because that's a lot of offices and a lot of people. But when it came to where can we cut and what do we have to do because we're in a downturn, that number, and this was my boss that insisted we did this. No, it wasn't something that I'd said. And he just said, yeah, let's just make sure the next 12 months could be really tough. Don't cut that bit. So, cars behind the bar for beers in certain offices work, going bowling, going go-karting, that sort of, all of that type of stuff stayed the same. And it really worked. And then when I was chairing a few smaller companies, I would say to the leaders of those businesses, make sure we're spending enough on our people. So the communication bit that I mentioned earlier is about understanding them and listening to them, making sure you really understood what's going on, but also spending time with them and not just talking about work. Because whatever we're feeling as leaders or whatever they're feeling it the same.
Yeah.
It may not present itself the same way, but they're in the same. And it's that whole saying, well, people say we're all in the same boat. Well, we're not. We're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. And that's
Yeah.
a really important thing to reckon.
Yeah. And I think that piece about communication is really important, and it links to support. So, for me, it's more effort on managers in having individual relationships with people, more focus on what individuals are. I don't mean micromanagement, but just that openness, that support, that morale, that coaching, that development, that acknowledgement that it is harder, right? It is harder, and people
Yeah.
need more of everything, not less of everything, at a time when you're going to be distracted, right? You're going to be distracted, but also sharing the challenges with people in a really open and honest way is massively powerful, I think. But it's not something I specifically can tell you about, Howard, because I didn't do it.
It's interesting, isn't it? So I think you can't lie to your people.
No.
So
No.
if the world is telling them that, it's going to hell in a handcart and it's not working properly, and the market's the worst market in the world, okay, I was always used to start to look for the little chink of light, the little bright side, the little driver, etc., etc. And it was those little things that I then started to pick up on. And that's the bit when we started to talk about celebrate all the little things, talk about all the little things. And I think as a leader, it was understanding what those little things were and how you celebrate them. Some people wanted them shouted across the room, some people wanted a little email, some people just wanted a pat on the back, etc. But it was those little things that once you started to highlight people who are doing well and keep highlighting things that they've done well and keep pushing that positivity, then people start to want that same accolade or that same affirmation from the leader that they're doing that. So as I was running multiple offices, before I went to an office, I would always ring the manager and say, "Give me one good thing or two good things that everybody's done in the office." So I could walk in and go, "Heather, I see you've done that, etc., etc." And you'd look at me and go, "How did he know that?" And those little things started to get them really sort of motivated because they were then looking for, how do I get that accolade? How do I get that praise? How do I get people talking? So we started to change the positive language of the office by looking at the things that we're doing. So it's celebrating those little wins. And the other side it was about getting in the trenches with them.
Mm, mm.
Not just sat there in your ivory tower as a manager. It was getting in your trenches, going on to meetings with them, going out and talking to them. And I always found that getting out with my consultants, going anywhere, you'd learn so much that was happening, so much was going on. And what they were saying is about, putting a little bit of expenditure on it, etc., going out and having just a clear out of everything. All of a sudden, you start to see things in a little bit of a clearer way. And all of a sudden, things start to happen. And if you celebrate the little things and get in the trenches with them and talk about the things that they're talking about, but then spin it in a more positive light and show them that there are ways that we can drive this forward, people start to look for it. And it's like that
Do
old
you know?
adage. I have to say,
Sorry, go on.
it's the old adage, isn't it? When you suddenly see a new car and you go, "Oh, I've not seen one of those before," and you suddenly see loads of them everywhere. If you look for the negative, you find the negative everywhere. If you look for the positive, you find it everywhere. And so it was trying to find and look for the positives, and people then start to see them in all sorts of different places.
Yeah, and I think that's so powerful, Howard. That piece about us leaders getting out, doing client meetings, doing client calls with our team, having them see what it's a learning opportunity, right? It's as well as being really good for their egos. It's really good for their sense of support. There's so many positives about getting out there. And I've seen many leaders in recruitment businesses who fall into a kind of admin and a troubleshooting job, that they end up almost being the office manager, not the leader. And actually they really need to get back out. They should be doing it anyway, but they now really need to get out there and be talking to clients and supporting their consultants, and being there, creating that such a strong relationship and understanding of what's really going on the front line. I think that's such a powerful thing.
So here's going to be a really interesting question. And I've thought about how I answer this quite heavily. Okay. What brutal feedback did you receive or ignore that could have changed things earlier?
And actually, I'm going to give an answer that I gave, I think, 4 or 5 weeks ago to a similar question. The feedback I got from my bosses was that I wasn't out enough with my customers. Yeah. So I would get, you're really good with your staff and you do this and you do that, all that sort of stuff. But actually, you're not spending enough time with your customers. And don't forget, Dave, that you have something important to say to them about the market and what's going on, as much as it is you're trying to sell, staffing solutions to them. So I think to your point earlier, Had, I think going out with your customers, and if you go out with one of your staff, the best bit is the journey to and from the customer, because you're bonding with your team member, your manager, your new consultant, whoever it may be. You're finding out a little bit more about them. You find out more about them than you do at a training session or something like that, because it's kind of out of the office. So going to the meeting is a really good thing. But actually, in all of this conversation about potential downturn, what do we do? Let's not forget that actually we need to be closer to the customer. And if we are, and many of our competitors aren't, then we've got, as it comes back again, we've got a stronger relationship with them. I think that's important.
Do you know, I'm trying to think of a piece of brutal feedback that I wish I'd read the question
Oh,
sooner,
Heather.
Oh,
Howard.
look at that!
Oh,
Look at that! Look
I
at
Heather.
that
just
halo! Look at that halo!
no, it's not that. It isn't Halo. It's not that I wasn't given feedback. I absolutely was given feedback, but not brutal. I have been so fortunate in the people I've worked for, in that I've I have had great bosses, right? I have had great bosses, and I've had I can't imagine ignoring feedback because it was constructive always. And so I'm trying to think. It's the word brutal that's completely thrown me. I maybe I was just really lucky in the people I've worked for, in the organisations I work for. I don't
That's good.
think.
That's an encouraging thing to hear, because we always assume, don't we? We do assume that all of leaders, or not all leaders, but we've all worked for bad people. Heather, I was in a meeting once. I got called into a meeting by my boss, and the first thing he said to me is, "Why are you here?" To which I answered, "Well, it's 11 o'clock." And he said, "No, no, no. Why are you actually here?" And it was so damning and actually so hurtful. I gave him a good answer, and that was fine. But it was that type of brutal leadership that
Yeah,
I didn't particularly appreciate. I'm not sure it served me very well, to be fair.
yeah.
And you can tell I'm still recovering from it now, because this is
Yeah,
20 odd
well,
years ago.
yeah, I've dealt with grievances all my career from people who've been on the receiving end of that sort
Right,
of management
right,
behaviour, right? So
right,
I don't think
right.
that the world is as glossy as my world, but I have been very lucky in that I've always worked for amazing leaders. I've always had fantastic managers right from very, very
That's
early
good.
on. Phenomenal people.
So it's interesting. I remember in a board meeting at Adecco, and we were talking about our we were talking about what we were planning to do the following year. And we had a new CEO in the business, and he was grilling the top three directors of each business within Adecco and having a real go at everybody about what's going on. And in the room, every time you went in, he would be sat there, then there'd be another director from another part of Adecco listening to what he was saying, etc. And we were talking about our business, and we were talking about what we were going to do. And the other director commented, I'm not doing that. And he gave a real brutal review of our business. And it was really, really brutal. And we sat there, the three of us, and they adjourned the meeting for a coffee break, and then we went back in. And as we sat there outside, we turned around and said, we do realize what this guy's doing, that he is trying to downplay us to look at what he can get from the new boss." And so we went back and challenged it. And it was the challenge that we came back with that was really interesting, because he was talking about, you're paying far too much commission to your people, you're paying far too much money out for this, etc., etc. It doesn't align with the strategy. And we turned around and said, well, where is the strategy? Because there isn't a strategy, pointing at the CEO, because he hadn't delivered a strategy. And we turned around and said, in your strategy, which was, I'm going to take all my key accounts from the top billers, give them to junior people and pay them less money to deliver. And we turned around and said, and do you think your business will be surviving in 12 months' time because all your top billers would leave? And he turned around and said, of course it will. And it was really interesting. The guy left the meeting and just left us on our own. And it was really brutal. We were like this sort of ship on our own. And the other director just looked at us and said, I hope you were listening, and walked out. And so we're sat there and we're thinking, we are absolutely sunk. 6 months later, both had disappeared out of the business because it was absolutely sinking. And we were there, but we went away from that conversation and we completely reviewed everything that we were doing, everything that was going on, because we felt it was so brutal and such an absolute direct joint at us, and said, this is you guys, you're falling this. And we said, we can't believe that what we're doing is right or wrong. We can only look at this. And we started to have that conversation of, there are no wrong and right ways to recruit. There are only better ways to recruit. There are no wrong and right ways to lead. There are only better ways to lead.
Yeah.
And we absolutely ripped our business plan apart, reconstructed it, and we had this massive growth from there. But it was a really private conversation. There was three of us in the room, plus the two others. Okay. And we sat there, and we'd been dragged down to Boreham Wood. So I'd come all the way down from Leeds to Boreham Wood, been made to get there for 8 o'clock in the morning. We had this meeting at 5 o'clock. Okay. The guy walked out at 5:45, and we said, where's he gone? And the other guy said, I don't know. So we rang him and said, where are you? And he went, oh, I'm now heading back to Southampton. And so he just walked out and left us in this room. We just thought it was absolutely brutal. Didn't want to listen, didn't want to know. All he wanted to was interested in what some other guy was saying, wasn't interested in what we were doing. But we took it really personally and went out and absolutely reshaped our business. And we really recovered from that position in a way that we'd never thought we'd recover. And so I think having brutal feedback sometimes is really good. And you've got to sort of accept it sometimes, listen to it. And I always say, there's that, when my dad used to say the same old thing. He said, you can listen to feedback, and you should always listen to feedback. It's your choice whether you act on it or not. And we acted on it really, really heavily and started to redefine things and realign things. And it really did change our business and what we did, sort of coming out of that 2008, 2009 period, and really drove it on. And what we found was the other two absolutely fell on their own swords because they were just not listening. They were just more interested in, look at me, I'm the big cheese and I can do what I like. And it was really there, but that brutal feedback really hurt us all three of us in that sat in that room. We were really shocked by the feedback.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? But ultimately, it gave you a reason to do something about it, right? So it's not always a bad thing, is it?
No,
Sometimes it's a really good thing. And that sense of discomfort that you all felt was what then motivated you to do something about it. And that's
yeah,
where your success came from. So
yeah.
yeah.
So last question, and I have to re-answer my last question because Heather stole my answer. Okay, if you could give one brutal, honest piece of advice to recruitment leaders who are currently struggling, what would it be?
Mine is
Uh,
to keep looking outwards. Keep keep looking outwards. So talking, I think somebody put it in the comments on the chat today. It's really important for recruitment leaders to talk to other recruitment leaders,
yeah,
talk to people
yeah,
who
yeah,
are in the same
yeah,
boat as them,
yeah.
and talk to clients and customers and candidates, and just to stay outwardly focused. As see, your actions are going to be inside your business, but don't lose the perspective of looking outside of your organization.
And mine is one, I guess, that we've heard before, but recognize that it's okay not to be okay. Recognize that it's okay, I'm struggling, and almost say that to yourself and then get that support. Make sure you've got support because you may not have it at home or you may not want to bring it home. Yeah, so make sure you've got mates who are honest with you in the recruitment sector or outside of the recruitment sector, but that you've got someone to talk to talk it through to. That's really, really important because whatever the struggle is, whether it's a leadership struggle, whether it's because of events outside, whatever it is, it's really important that you, as the leader who is running the business, is accountable to the people, has someone to talk things through with. And we've all been there. There's plenty of people, and in fact, the people you shouldn't be talking to are the ones that have never been there, because I just don't believe them.
So I was going to say, don't believe what people are saying about the market because there's always other clients that are buying.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Heather stole that earlier, so I'm going to.
Sorry, Howard.
That's fine. That's fine. You can steal away. So I'm going to sort of think about sort of something else that as a leader, I think it's really important that you take counsel from other people and you, I suppose, acid test your strategy, your methodology, and the execution of that to find out where the strengths within that are and where the weaknesses are. And don't be afraid to change the way you do things to get the same results that you're trying to aim. And I think that's the bit that people are too afraid to change when things are going wrong. And they think that they're going to keep doing the same things and it's going to get the same results when it doesn't. And I think you've got to sometimes step outside and have counsel with somebody who's going to give you a different idea of what's that. And I will say now, the last 3 or 4 clients that I've picked up, of new businesses that I've picked up, that has been the topic of conversation. What are you doing? What's going on? Right. How about looking at this? How about looking at that? And they've all gone, never thought about that, never even understood that, didn't do that. They've all started to do the type of things that we've talked about, and they're starting to see an upturn in their business. So I think sometimes getting that outside conversations going, whether that be in a network, whether that be with a coach or mentor, whether that be with someone outside the business, whether it be with your friends, etc., gives you a different perspective that you've got to look at. And I think that's the bit that, as a piece of advice, you're not alone. Talk to other people because they will give you other things to think about and other ways of doing things. Dave, Heather, thank you very much. It's been, I think, a really interesting conversation. Some really interesting points have been made today from there. Ladies and gents, thanks very much for your time as well. Much appreciated. Next week is week 3 of the series on leadership of Recruitment Leaders Unlocked. So have a look at that. If you haven't seen it already, they're on all the podcast labels, Spotify, etc. Also on our website, also on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen them, log on, have a look. There's some really great some great threads for recruitment leaders to follow and some really interesting views on how people are doing things, whether it be a business between 1 and 5 heads or a business with 200 heads plus. The synergy in some of them is unbelievable, but the nuances are really interesting to listen to. So I advise you all to have a listen to those and see what you think. Okay, give us some feedback because we're always welcome to feedback. And say the next one is out next Wednesday. Dave, Heather, thanks for your time, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.